Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We have a great show for you today. We are going to be covering a lot of NFL. There's a bunch of news that came around it, and also we're going to be continuing our MLB offseason series, the MLB offseason files. This time we'll be jumping into the defending World Series champions, the Texas Rangers. But before we get into that, we're going to start off our show with the NFLPA's second annual report card. Just came out earlier today. We're going to look at all the weird, wacky stuff that came into that with some trends, see who has improved the most from year to year, among other things. Like I said in segment 2, we're going to continue our baseball coverage with the Texas Rangers. Segment 3, Mel Kiper. He dropped his mock draft earlier today. We're going to go through that, talk about a couple things that I found interesting in that draft, and some things that I agree and disagree with. And finally, we're going to close out our show. There's been a lot of rumors around not just quarterbacks in the free agent market, but quarterbacks that are on teams seemingly safe or unsafe, where they might go, what their future might have in store with their teams. But yeah, before we get too far into this show, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to new link, gsmcpodcast.net. So much easier, rolls right off the tongue. Again, you can leave a tip or donation. It'll scroll across the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little bit of a discussion. We appreciate anything you give. We appreciate you watching. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But without further ado, let's just get right into it. Like I said, the first story and the main story that we're going to cover today is going to be about the NFLPA's second annual report card. If you remember last year, they dropped this report card for the first time. It had a lot of interesting findings, including the Commanders being the worst rated team. The Jaguars had rats in the locker room. There were a lot of things that we found out. The Cardinals had some really, really bad facilities. But that was last year. This year there have been some changes. Some things have stayed the same. At the top of the list, Dolphins and the Vikings in a league of their own. You go look at every grade, and they are well above everyone. What they do for these report cards is they take 11 categories: treatment of families, nutrition, weight room, strength staff, training room, training staff, locker room, and travel, and they give each team a grade based on it. And each of those grades has a different weight. The grading weight, also coaches and owners are on here as well. So the owner has a 15% weight towards the total overall grade. Head coach is 10%. Travel is 9%. So is strength coach, weight room, training staff, and training room and locker room, as well as the cafeteria. The dietitian and the treatment of families are both at 6%. So the biggest factors in this are the club owner and the head coach. So we'll take a look at those. And that led to some surprising results. These grades go from A+ to F-. F- is a 49 and below, and an A+ is a 97 and above. So there were a couple big things that stuck out to me. Obviously, we already mentioned at the top of the show that the Vikings and the Dolphins, who were the top two teams last year, continued to be at the top of the list. In almost every single category, they were well ahead of every single team. They believe they had A's across the board, at least for the Minnesota Vikings, and the Dolphins as well. Both of those teams had A's across the board. They were the only two teams to have that. So good on the Vikings and the Dolphins. Last year, the Vikings were number 1. This year, the Dolphins are number 1. They did do a little flip-flop there. And we talked about rats in the Jaguars locker room. And that was a big reason why the Jaguars were all the way down at 28 in the last NFL Players Association poll. This year they jumped all the way up to 5. So massive improvements from the Jaguars. It's what we like to see. That's the reason that stuff like this is put out, is so that the players can air their grievances and that these teams can improve. The Bengals had a grievance last year saying that they never served the players 3 meals a day, and while that wasn't entirely fixed, they did move to 3 meals a day on Wednesdays. So you can say minor improvements. Improvements are improvements. At the bottom of the list, we talked about the Dolphins and the Vikings. At the bottom of the list were the Washington Commanders. They were at the bottom of the list last year. So 2 years in a row, they are the only team in the NFL to ever lose this. They've lost it both times that this has been done. You'd think with a new owner, Josh Harris, that some improvements would be made. And while their grade was a little bit better than it was last year, it wasn't enough to not be last in the league. Getting rid of Dan Snyder is a huge deal for them. So, looking at all this, they still ended up at the bottom. They had Fs with almost everything. They had 1 D+, 1 C+. They did have an A+ for strength staff, which is good because we've heard horror stories from them with their strength staff. So they are making improvements steadily, but it's not enough. They're still the worst in the league overall. We talk about another surprising team, and this one was probably the most surprising thing to me. The most surprising thing to me was the Kansas City Chiefs ranking. The Kansas City Chiefs were 31st, just ahead of the Washington Commanders there. And a lot of that had to do, we talked about the percentage breakdown. A lot of that had to do with the fact that their owner was rated the worst in the league. They were promised new facilities, but they never got those new facilities. They were promised a lot of things that just never happened. And it really is interesting to see them have so much success and the players be so unhappy. They did rate Andy Reid as the best coach in the league. He, like I said, coaches got rated. That was 10% of it. So Andy Reid was rated as the best coach of the league. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have guys like Josh McDaniels, who got the worst grade for head coaches. He alone is there in the D. There's a big crowd above them at B's and C's and A's, but the only one that got a D was Josh McDaniels for the Raiders, and he was fired mid-season. We're talking about 3 coaches who got A+ grades. That would be Andy Reid, Dan Campbell, and Kevin O'Connell. So the Lions, the Vikings, and the Chiefs gave A+, but the Chiefs were still at the bottom of the league, which is really interesting to me. You talk about a team that just won back-to-back Super Bowls, and for the players to come out just a month later, not even, with this report saying that, oh, it sucks here, basically. It's not the greatest look. You'd think that with success, they'd be able to, make some of those changes. They'd be able to make the players happy. But it's really a disappointing report card for them. Their best grade was in treatment of families. They got a B, or excuse me, I guess it was Andy Reid. They had 4 Ds and an F. They were the worst ranked team in training staff, which for a team that makes these deep runs is crazy. You can't be hoping you can't be making these deep runs with this bad of training staff, and hopefully that changes, because obviously health is the most important thing in the league. You could have the most talented roster, you could have the best people out there doing it on the field, but if no one is there to help them stay healthy, to help them stay on the field, you're not going to be a good team. So for the Chiefs to be as successful as they are and have the worst training staff is kind of shocking to me, honestly. Like I said, their owner was rated the worst. They did have a lot for families. And the only positive for food service was that they got 3 meals a day. So they're beating the Bengals at something there. But it's really disappointing for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Those were the main points that I got from the report card. There's obviously a lot to look at there, and not a lot of time. I would highly encourage that all of you go check it out. It's a really quick thing to go see. You can go see where your team is located. My Giants were in the top 10, so that's something positive for us. So there's always something to look forward to. Take a look at these rankings. They're really interesting. Keep an eye out for next year's, see if these teams can improve. In our next segment, we're going to be covering the Texas Rangers and their 2024 offseason. I appreciate everybody so much for tuning in and sticking around. Stick around through this quick break. We will be back with the Texas Rangers in just a second.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. Out of this shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that sound. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking through that break. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the NFLPA's report cards and some major takeaways from that. I encourage all of you guys to go check that out. There's some really interesting stuff there. You can go check out your own team's report cards, what they did good, what they did bad, what they need to improve on. You know, this will help attract free agents. This really is something that can help a lot of teams. In this segment that we're about to go over, we are going to continue our coverage of the MLB offseason, this time covering the Texas Rangers, the 2023 World Series champions, their offseason, what I expect them to do in their defense of the title season. And in future segments, we'll be switching back to the NFL. Mel Kiper put out his mock draft. We'll be breaking that down. And then in the fourth segment, there's a lot of rumored quarterback movement going on. So we're going to take a look at some breaking news with that, where they might end up, and what might be the future for these teams and these quarterbacks. But before we get too far into this segment, I'd like to remind everyone that if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. You leave a tip or donation by going to this website. With a comment, it'll scroll across the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little discussion. Be an even bigger part of the show than you already are. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. We appreciate all of your support here at GSMC. But let's get right into our second segment. We are going to be covering the MLB Offseason Files Part 5. This time, the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers had the best season you could possibly have in baseball. And it's a shame that we're talking about them. Fifth, World Series champion. You can't get much better than that. You really can't get any better than that. For those who are unaware, they defeated the Arizona Diamondbacks in the World Series. This is their first World Series as a franchise, so they are in title defense mode. The Rangers, who have been a very aggressive team in recent free agent periods, recent off seasons, kind of slowed down. Obviously, coming off a World Series championship, all those moves paid off. Signing Corey Seager and Marcus Semien to those massive contracts a couple years ago. Going after the big fish in Jacob deGrom. Now, that didn't contribute too much as he got hurt, but they did end up winning the World Series there, so you can't blame them too much. You can't really say that much bad about them. The Texas Rangers were a little more quiet than usual. With at least this regime has been usually. They only made a couple minor moves. They got a couple back-end relievers in David Robinson and Kirby Yates. Kirby Yates coming over from the Braves, where he served as that late inning, 7th, 8th inning type guy. He had a really solid season over there. He could transition into a closer role later on down the line, depending on the situation there. They already have a closer in Texas on that team, so they seem to have it locked up. But another guy they brought in, David Robinson, another veteran, another guy kind of like Kirby Yates, who is coming over from the Mets. They both had pretty solid seasons last year. They both kind of fit that same role. They both could close if you needed them to. They both have closer experience. But like I said, the Rangers already have a closer, so they're not going to get that closer role right off the bat. If anything is to happen, their closers struggle. I expect David Robinson to get the first crack at that closer spot, and then Kirby Yates. But they went out and they addressed that pitching staff. Along with those two in the bullpen, they went out and they got Tyler Mahle, previously on the Minnesota Twins. Now, he is hurt, but bring him over from the Twins on a relatively cheap deal. They are shoring up that pitching staff. He won't be there for the first half of the season, as, like I said, he is injured. But you add that to a rotation of Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom when he's healthy again. Maybe Jordan Montgomery is still out there, so is Blake Snell. I don't expect them to get Blake Snell, but maybe they'll still re-sign Jordan Montgomery. We saw the first of the Scott Boras clients go a couple days ago with Cody Bellinger re-signing with the Cubs, so maybe we'll see a reunion with Jordan Montgomery to the Rangers. And again, that would make the pitching staff up there in the league when healthy. Obviously, that's the caveat. They've got a lot of older or injury-prone guys on that roster. Tyler Mahle is injury-prone. Jacob deGrom is injury-prone. Max Scherzer is getting older. But those three guys at the top of your rotation, in a perfect world when they're all healthy and they're playing, that's a really, really good rotation. So, title defense season, they brought back Adolis Garcia, their big star from the playoffs. on a 2-year deal. He is back there. They didn't really lose too much. They lost some depth at catcher, and they went and got Kaiser as a pickup there as well. So they didn't really lose that much from their team, which you don't see too often. You don't see a lot of times, especially in baseball, an entire roster basically come back after winning the World Series. They go off and they get paid that World Series tax. You know how it works. But on their quest to repeat as champions, the Texas Rangers have basically brought back the same lineup. At least all their big players are back. Now, obviously, Jordan Montgomery is still gone. He is not a major player, but he played a key role in that playoff. In those playoffs, he pitched really well down the stretch. So, looking ahead to their 2024 season, obviously, they just won the World Series. So, it's going to be good. This team, their offense was so explosive last season. Their offense was one of the best in the leagues, and it was their pitching that was the real weakness. And they were able to make that up. Obviously, won a World Series. I keep harping on that, keep going back to it. But as far as repeating, they are in a really tough division. You have the Houston Astros, you have the Seattle Mariners, you have even the Angels. They're a lot worse off this year than they have been in years past, but whenever you have Mike Trout, I'm never going to completely count them out, although I probably should because of their track record. Is a really, really stacked division. So it's not going to be an easy path to the playoffs, to the World Series. I don't think that they're going to repeat. I think a lot of things went right in their playoff run for them, including matchups. I think they got a little lucky. It's no shade on the Arizona Diamondbacks last year, but having to face them in the World Series as opposed to the Braves or the Dodgers, I think was massive for a team that had some question marks in the pitching staff. Now, the Arizona Diamondbacks, obviously, they did their job. They beat the teams they needed to beat. But going up against some of these tougher teams in the NL, if that had happened, I don't know if they would have won that series. But the Rangers, they're a very good team. They are going to make the playoffs, I think. And I am a little less comfortable, honestly, saying that they're a lock, which is weird coming off a World Series and not losing that many guys. I don't know if they'll win their division. Like I said, that division is stacked. The Mariners reloaded, and they have a nasty pitching staff. The Astros, we know what the Astros are. They're a really, really good team. I do think that the Rangers will make the wild card, though. The AL is a really, really tough league. You have the East and the West. Both of those divisions have three teams at least that could conceivably make the playoffs this year. That if you put them in the playoffs, most people would be like, yeah, I guess I can see them making it. In the East, you could even go 5 deep if you really want. And in the West, you go 3 deep. So it's a really, really tough title defense for the Texas Rangers. I'm not so sure that they can repeat as champions, but I do think that they will make the playoffs as a wild card this season. Now, obviously, we've seen their ceiling. Their ceiling is a championship, but their floor, I honestly wouldn't be shocked if they missed the playoffs this year, and that might be a little bit of a hot take, but that AL really is just so stacked. It's so loaded, even inside their division. When you have to play so many games against these teams, it really is a flip of the coin sometimes. Baseball's very random, so I wouldn't be shocked if they missed the playoffs. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, because I'm not sure if how hot of a take that is. But looking at the rest of the AL, their roster, as good as it is, doesn't convince me that they'll make the playoffs. So I do think they'll take a little bit of a step back, a little bit of that World Series hangover. They have guys that have done it before, obviously. They've got some veterans on there. But I'm not super convinced that this team is on the path to repeating, especially with those teams in not just the AL, but you look at the reloading that some of the top teams in the NL did in the offseason. So yeah, like I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Texas Rangers, their upcoming season, and their offseason. I thought it was a solid offseason for them. They were able to keep most of their guys, but I'm not convinced that they'll make the playoffs. I think they will, but I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't. Yeah. So in our next segment, we are going back to the NFL. We're going to break down Mel Kiper's mock draft that came out today. If you are just tuning in, I appreciate you guys for sticking around. We're going to go on a quick break, and we will be right back. Thank you so much.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us through that break. If you are just tuning in, we covered the NFLPA report card, the second annual one, some major takeaways from that in the first segment. In the second segment that we just finished up, we covered the Texas Rangers, their offseason, what we expect them to do in the upcoming 2024 year on their title defense. Upcoming in this segment, we are going to be covering Mel Kiper's mock draft that just came out today. And in the segment, in the fourth segment, to finish up our show, we'll be talking about some possible quarterback movements, some people that are already on teams that might lose their job or get cut or traded, some news around that as well. But before we get too far into this segment, I'd just like to remind everybody that if you would like to be a bigger part of today's show or any show in the future, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net to leave a tip or donation. You can leave that tip or donation with a note. It'll scroll across the bottom of that screen for me and everybody else to see. You can participate with me directly, and we'll have a little conversation. Again, if you want to be a bigger part of the show, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation, and we'll have a little chat. But like I was saying, we are going to break down Mel Kiper's mock draft today in this segment. Mel Kiper, the draft analyst for ESPN, dropped his most recent mock draft, full first round. And there were a couple big things. This is his second mock draft. There are a couple big changes. We talk about, obviously, the big question, Justin Fields or Caleb Williams or whatever the Bears, are going to do in the first overall pick. He has them taking just Caleb Williams. My brain is all over the place. And I agree with this move. So, mock draft 2.0 off to a good start. He has 4 quarterbacks going in the first round. Now, I know a lot of talk has been put on the big three quarterbacks in this draft. Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. And that fourth quarterback that a lot of people are saying is J.J. McCarthy. And Mel Kiper has him going 12th to the Broncos. I am a staunch J.J. McCarthy hater, a non-believer. I don't think he's very good. I think it's absolutely a waste of a pick with that first round. But we'll get into J.J. McCarthy in just a little bit. At the top of the draft, the first thing that I had a little surprise here is at number 2, Mel Kiper has the Washington Commanders taking Jaden Daniels over Drake May. Now, what Jaden Daniels has is that mobility, that dual threat that a lot of people love. And they just did bring in Cliff Kingsbury, who made the big move to draft Kyler out of Oklahoma in his first year for that kind of offense. But I just think that Drake May is straight up a better quarterback. I think it's as much of a weapon as Jaden Daniels is. I think that there is enough of a gap between him and Drake May that it'd probably be a mistake to take him over, to take Jaden Daniels over him. Now, that's not to say that Jaden Daniels is a bad quarterback. I think he's going to be really good in this league. I just think he needs a little more time to develop than Drake May. And for the Washington Commanders, a team that's gone through so many changes recently, I feel like it'd be better for them to get a more ready quarterback. So that leaves the Patriots at 3 taking Drake May. So the top 3 picks are quarterbacks, leaving Marvin Harrison Jr. to fall all the way down to 4, which if he falls past 4, it's a travesty. He is a generational receiver. And that's the next big thing that I wanted to talk about, the wide receiver rankings. Outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously there's a top 3 in this class: Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, and Malik Neighbors. And the big debate right now is who is the better receiver. Is it Rome Odunze or is it Malik Neighbors? And I don't think you can go wrong with either of them. So I personally believe Rome Odunze is the better receiver. Him being that big physical guy, being able to make those big catches, and it's the same thing for Malik Neighbors. But what I'm seeing in all these mock drafts is whoever the Giants don't take at 6, Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, is what I've been seeing the most. The Bears get the other guy at 9, which we've talked about this a bunch on this show. I think is a great draft for them. If they can get Caleb Williams and one of those top 3 receivers, I would be so happy if I was the Chicago Bears. Now, it's not always going to work out like this, but looking at all of these mock drafts, the way that it's kind of lining up, it might work out for them, assuming no trades. So, the other question, the main point of this draft that I wanted to talk about was J.J. McCarthy going 12. There's a lot of question marks with J.J. McCarthy, him specifically, and going to the Broncos there at 12. I've seen it a lot. I personally have 2 or 3. I think J.J. McCarthy is about the 6th best quarterback on the board this draft cycle. I think Michael Penix is a better quarterback. I'm a big fan of him. I think Bo Nix even is better than J.J. McCarthy. I think one of those things that is dangerous with him is, recency bias. Again, I talk about this a lot because it's something that is huge in all these off seasons, and we're in the off season in all these sports. This recency bias issue. JJ McCarthy is coming off a national championship. He led his team there. He's been there 4 years, and he's put up pretty good numbers. He is an NFL backup quarterback to me. And it's most college quarterbacks aren't that. It kind of, for me, harkens back to winners getting drafted, not based on their team, not them. You can go back to a guy like A.J. McCarron, with Alabama, or Georgia, Stetson Bennett, more recently, who got drafted, I believe, in the 5th round last year. He was only drafted that high because the team won. The team around him was good. And I'm getting I get the same kind of feeling with J.J. McCarthy watching the tape. Not that he isn't a good quarterback, because to win in college, you have to be a good quarterback, But as far as being an NFL quarterback, I'm not sure. I think A.J. McCarron is a great example. He won a lot at Alabama. And then he just didn't pan out in the NFL. He makes a comeback in the XFL last season, and he plays great. And that's what he is. He's a backup quarterback, better than a lot of guys, can get you to win games, but he's not an NFL quarterback. And that's the kind of category that I think J.J. McCarthy falls into. It's not a category that you want to be wasting a first-round pick on. But all this hype around him, all this buzz that seemingly came out of nowhere, I'm not a fan of J.J. McCarthy at 12. I wouldn't draft him, period, but the earliest that I would draft him is in the 4th or 5th round. I don't think he is worth a day 1 or day 2 pick. If you want to take a risk on him, it would be day 3 for me. Now, obviously, NFL GMs and NFL circles, there's always that one guy that rises, and it's not always a bad thing. It's not always a bad example. Joe Burrow kind of rose out of nowhere. That was supposed to be Tua's draft, and he rose because he had one of the greatest college seasons of all time. Mitch Trubisky on the bad example. He kind of rose at the end in that draft cycle, ended up going number 2 overall, and we know how that panned out. There's just a lot of examples of these kind of guys getting all this draft buzz, and I really don't understand it with J.J. McCarthy. Maybe he'll go out there and prove me wrong, but I don't have a lot of faith, and I think it would be a waste of a first-round pick to get him in this draft, in the first round at least. We talked about the Giants a little bit with their wide receivers and that wide receiver ranking as well. But if you were the Giants, I'd like to pose this question. You have Daniel Jones. You kind of have to hold on to him for 1 more year with the way that his contract is. After that, you can cut him loose if you want. And we'll talk a little bit about this in our next segment. But would you draft a quarterback? Would you trade up for a quarterback? Would you sit there and be happy with getting a guy in the 2nd round or something like that? I know what I would do if I was the Giants, and we'll get into this in the next segment a little bit. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And go check out this mock draft. Let me know what you think about it. But yeah, in the upcoming segment, we are going to be covering a bunch of quarterback moves, including Daniel Jones, Zach Wilson. We're going to be talking about Russell Wilson a little bit. So this segment kind of leads into the next, as obviously each of these draft picks kind of depends on what these teams do in the offseason leading up to the draft. But stick around. We will be right back with that next segment. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking through that break. If you are just tuning in for the first time, we started our show off talking about the NFLPA report card that came out, some surprising stuff in there, some major takeaways. You should all go check that out. It's really interesting. In our second segment, we continued our Offseason Files report, episode 5, this time on the Texas Rangers, the defending World Series champion. We talked about their offseason and what their 2024 season outlook kind of looks like. Segment 3, which we just finished, we broke down some major things in Mel Kiper's mock draft 2.0 that came out earlier today. And in this segment, we are going to finish off our show with some quarterback news and questions. There's some major players, not free agents like Kirk Cousins, but some players on teams that are seemingly about to get cut or might get cut or traded or something like that we are going to talk a little bit about where they might go, how that might affect draft season and the rest of the offseason and 2024. But before we get too far into this segment, I'd like to remind everybody that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you are right now, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation. Your message will scroll across the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little talk about it, have a little chat. Again, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. But let's get right into this fourth segment. And like I kind of led into this segment with at the end of last segment, one of those quarterbacks is Daniel Jones. And it's a really interesting situation that Daniel Jones and the Giants find themselves in. Daniel Jones coming off a season where he tore his ACL, only played 6 games, and in those 6 games he did not look very good. So he's not going to be healthy to begin the season. but he is fresh off a $40 million year contract. 4-year contract, $160 million total. But the way that contract is structured, the Giants have an out after this year. And with the 6th overall pick and a quarterback class like this one, if the Giants were going to make a move off of Daniel Jones, this is probably the year to do it. You can have that guy, your rookie, sit behind him for one season, play backup for a little bit, get a little bit of experience, but not throw him into the fire immediately. You have this guy, and if you want, you can move off of Daniel Jones next season, depending on how this season goes. Either way, you're not on the hook for that much money. Now, if you do end up deciding to keep Daniel Jones for not just this season, but next season, drafting a quarterback this year obviously would not be the right decision. So there's a lot of dominoes that have to fall here. Firstly, I want to preface this discussion with he's staying with the Giants this season. There's no team that is going to take that contract for this year. And the Giants really can't cut him. There's a lot of dead cap. So, because it was a very front-loaded contract, because while the Giants were kind of forced to pay him since he won a playoff game, they did it in such a way that while having him locked up long-term, if it doesn't work out, then they have an out after year 2. So, if you are the Giants and you have your choice between getting a guy like Jaden Daniels or Drake May, depending on who the Commanders pick at 2, because the Giants probably, or the furthest they can move up is 3. If they have a guy that they really, really like, they have a guy that they really want there at 3, it might be worth it to make that move. Now, me personally, I would sit there at 6, and with all these, with the teams ahead of them, you can get an elite receiver, and we've seen that in a lot of mocks that we've gone over. You can get Rome Odunze, or you can get Malik Neighbors, whichever one you prefer. Both of those guys are game-changing talents, and putting them in an offense that desperately needs that elite receiver. They were supposed to have Darren Waller be that number 1 receiver as a tight end, but him being so injury-prone, it didn't work out. And behind him, you have a bunch of wide receiver 2 and 3s. Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, Sterling Shepard. None of these guys pop off the page at you. None of these guys you want in your fantasy lineup. The Giants in the NFL nowadays, you kind of need that elite receiver. So, as a Giants fan, I think it's worth it. I think it's not worth it to grab a quarterback in this draft. I don't think they should move on from Daniel Jones quite yet. Like I was saying, the contract is so front loaded that holding on to him for this year is kind of a must. So giving him one more chance, I believe, is worth it. And giving him a real weapon for the first time in his career is something that could absolutely change the game. They had Kadarius Toney for a couple years, but he was always hurt. And when he saw the field for one game, he went for 200 yards. I stand by that contract, though. I think the Giants were kind of forced to do it, and extending him I was on board with, but giving him a lot of money, it's not really worth it. So front-loading it the way they did and having the out after year 2, I think was the best way they could do it. And I think there's going to be a lot of contracts that are structured this way. A guy like Baker Mayfield, I believe, might get a similar contract this offseason with the Buccaneers. It's going to look like a big number. Might be 4 years for $43 million a year, something like that. $42 million a year or something. But it's going to be front-loaded for those first 2 years, so that if Baker does what he had done with the Browns and kind of fall off a cliff again, the Buccaneers have an out. And I think that's a really smart way that the Giants did that. So I stand by that contract. But I don't think they should move on from him quite yet, especially with the level of talent in wide receiver at this draft at 6. Trading up, you'd have to give up a lot. So there's been a lot of discussion around that. But I say run it back one more year, and then this should be a bigger discussion next year when you have more freedom in the cap space. Thank you for the question. But some other quarterbacks that might be on the move. There was a Russell Wilson. We talked a little bit about the Broncos drafting J.J. McCarthy in the mock draft. Now, as much as I dislike J.J. McCarthy, Russell Wilson, his huge contract also is a reason why the Broncos haven't cut him yet. He signed that huge extension when he was traded there, and obviously it has not worked out. While last season was a lot better, so much better than 2 seasons ago, it wasn't quite enough for Broncos faithful, Broncos front office, Broncos coaches, Sean Payton, to be convinced in Russell Wilson. He got benched near the end of the year. It doesn't seem like he wants to be there. So where are some landing places that he could go? Russell Wilson, you go look at a team like the Vikings, who are looking for a quarterback. He is already getting paid that much money. A lot of it is guaranteed. So a team like them, who isn't going to be able to trade for Justin Fields, who isn't drafting high enough to get one of those elite prospects, at least elite quarterbacks, but is close enough to competing, they're basically a quarterback away. And it's a very similar, eerily similar to a situation that the Broncos were in when they traded for Russell Wilson. But the Vikings aren't going to have to give up that much. And I still think Russell Wilson has some juice left in him. I still think he can turn it around. I don't think we'll see him be that elite quarterback that he was in Seattle ever again. But I think if you put him in a good situation, not that the Broncos weren't, I think that was a really, really good situation for him. But maybe just for whatever reason, he just couldn't get it. He couldn't get it done there. Moving to Minnesota, I think that would be a really good fit for him. You have Justin Jefferson. If they can get the run game going a little bit, that would make their offense really, really good. You see what Nick Mullins did. You know, he was passing for 500 yards a game. Now, he was also throwing 4 interceptions, but he was putting up numbers over there. And if you have a guy that just doesn't turn the ball over, I think the Vikings might have snuck into the playoffs last year. So I think that's one place to look out for Russell Wilson to end up joining. It'd be a smaller contract, but I think that'd be a really good fit for him. And some more quarterback news that came out today. The Jets gave Zach Wilson permission to seek a trade. Now, this isn't the biggest surprise, given how things were with Zach Wilson and the Jets last season, the kind of fractured relationship he has, not just with the front office and coaching staff, but with Aaron Rodgers now, with reports that have come out in this offseason. Giving him permission to seek a trade, the Jets were not going to bring him back. He's not going to fetch a lot, but giving him a backup role, I wouldn't mind, honestly. I don't think he is going to get any trade value, really. Their Jets are probably going to have to cut him with how low his value is right now. We saw a very similar thing happen, again, with Baker Mayfield. Obviously, these are 2 different level of quarterbacks, but the same kind of situation. The Browns had no leverage. They had to cut him or trade him for, what was it, a 6th or 7th round pick to the Panthers when they traded him. So there's not going to be a lot of trade value on Zach Wilson here. But if he is to go somewhere, he's not going to start. He's going to have to work his way, prove that last season was just his whole first couple years were just a fluke. Now, I don't think that he really can turn his career around at this point. But I don't think it's. I can see a team. I can see him providing some value as a backup quarterback or a third string guy on a team. Maybe like an emergency quarterback, someone that can go in. And he has these performances. We've seen it a couple times last season where he played like a really good quarterback, but he's not consistent enough to be a starter in the NFL. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on Daniel Jones, Russell Wilson, or Zach Wilson if you think he will even get a job in the league. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Tune in tomorrow. We got a lot of great stuff for you. Thank you everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
I don't wanna go. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.